Who is the most iconic character of FNAF? Well, it's Golden Freddy, but who exactly is Golden Freddy? And I'm not referring to the spirit or spirits who haunt this animatronic. I'm talking about the history of Golden Freddy. Who originally designed him? Where was the first location he appeared in? And can we use him to create a rough timeline of events of FNAF? Well, I believe the story of Golden Freddy actually starts with Fredbear, because I believe Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the exact same animatronic. I believe that Golden Freddy is merely the result of the bite of 83. But Fredbear's story starts with Fredbear's Sing & Show, which we got the first clue from FNAF Security Breach as one of the collectibles we can get. This poster shows us that this was an attraction full of fun, music, food, beverage, and entertainment. And the tickets were literally only 50 cents per person. Take the 50 cents paired with the artistic format of this poster, we can conclude that this is either from the late 1930s to the late 1950s. This appears to be some sort of traveling act show that most likely consisted of an eating area, a stage, and mascots that could sing. Now, I personally believe that the mascots were merely costumes, possibly even from MCM themselves this far back. And performers would wear these mascot costumes and perform very elaborate and fun plays. I mean, just look at the illustration of Fredbear here. This looks very similar to a costume designs that we see later on in Secret of the Mimic. Oh, excuse me, did I say Fredbear? Well, what if this is actually Freddy? And before you click off your video, read this part that is underneath the 50-cent general admission on the poster. Enjoy perfect entertainment for the family with fresh, unalterated food and beverage while being serenaded by our local singing bear, Freddy, not Fredbear. I don't know why it took me this long to realize this, but it's actually possible that Freddy Fazbear as a character started a lot farther back than what we thought. It's been very clear throughout the FNAF franchise that Fredbear and Freddy are two separate characters. And this is the first discrepancy that I've seen from FNAF. Granted, there are discrepancies, but this is the first I've seen of this particular topic. Now, I have a feeling this is a longer topic for another video, so we'll just stick this in our back pocket for another time. Now, in Secret of the Mimic, which takes place in 1979, one of the collectibles we can get from that game is a record for a record player from Fredbear's Sing & Show. This record is called Kids Classics and is built best for a 33 RPM stereo, which, by doing a little bit of research, a 33 RPM studio was most common found in family homes during the 1940s to 1960s. So we can theoretically say that throughout these years, Fredbear's Sing & Show was a smashing success. As for during this time period, printing your own record labels was seen as more of a luxury item as opposed to just doing it all the time. And you would have to have had money in order to do this, which meant you were doing well. And so exiting out of the 1960s, we now come to the 1970s, which I believe is a very important date for Fazbear Entertainment in general. I believe it's at this point that they become an actual corporate entity and start promoting their characters that they are using and creating through Fall Fest, a public event where multiple creators can come to and try to win the public's eye. And I believe that the 1970 Fall Fest, this poster that we get from Help Wanted 2, was the first Fall Fest that Fazbear Entertainment attended. And they brought their many mascot costume designs of Fredbear, Spring Bunny, and possibly Freddy and others to show off to the public in some grand and wonderful performances. And things went absolutely perfectly, and they kept returning back to this place annually every single year. Now, obviously know that Edwin Murray's wife, Fiona, ends up dying in a fire at one of these Fall Fests. Now, I believe it's during the mid-1970s that William Afton and Henry Emily, who are business partners by this point, realize that they can do something much better as opposed to just traveling around at annual shows. They want something that's going to go on all year round. And around this time, arcade cabinets were becoming a lot more popular. And so they decided to take Fredbear's Sing & Show and video games and merge them together to create Fredbear's Family Diner. and working side by side with Edwin Murray and MCM, create perfectly shaped characters for this pizzeria. But that's when I asked myself, what were the first variants of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie to be in Fredbear's Family Diner? Well, in the gameplay of Secret of the Mimic, we can find the posters in 1979 promoting Fredbear's Family Diner. And these characters that are on these posters appear not to be animatronics. In fact, they appear to be more of a costume design. Take a look. Here is a poster from Secret of the Mimic of Fredbear's Family Diner, and here is a poster, the classic Celebrate poster from Five Nights at Freddy's 1, and you can clearly see the differences between the two. Here's what I think is going on here. We are currently seeing these posters in 1979. That probably means that they have been up for at least a while. Theoretically, let's just say that Fredbear's Family Diner opened in 1975, and their posters got put in there in 1975. That means they've been up for roughly about 4 years. And as we all know, a lot can happen in 4 years in Five Nights at Freddy's. Because by 1979, we can see emails and also hear VHS tapes left by Edwin Murray about him creating the version 2s of the springlock suits. What are springlock suits, you may ask? Well, I believe that they were originally designed and invented by Henry Emily. These were costumes that could be both animatronic and be worn like a suit for performers. They used advanced springlock technology and a hand crank to wind up the animatronic parts and allow a performer to crawl inside. However, this version that was created by Henry Emily was extremely unstable to multiple things: fast, jerky movement, water, and to be honest, pretty much anything. But nevertheless, they were using these springlock suits at Fredbear's Family Diner. But since these suits were so dangerous, Fazbear Entertainment commissioned Edwin Murray to build them safer version 2 springlock suits. These springlock suits are extremely more stable and can be found in the basement of MCM in our gameplay of Secret of the Mimic, hiding behind curtains. We can see a version of Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Bud the dog, and even Monty. But alas, Edwin Murray's work would never be shown to the public, as on one of the cassette tapes that he leaves us in Secret of the Mimic, he voices his frustration as Fazbear Entertainment, more specifically Henry Emily, sent him a change order to completely erase these version 2 springlock suits, and instead to create full-blown 100% animatronics for the pizzeria. No more springlock suits. This obviously annoys him, and he begins that project. But what becomes of those springlock suits that were being used, the version 1s? Well, so far everything has been going mostly fine for Fazbear Entertainment. But in the year of 1983, something happened that would change the course of events for FNAF forever. And it all revolves around Fredbear. You see, in the mini-games of FNAF 4, we are shown a pizzeria. Now, it is still up for debate whether or not this is Fredbear's Family Diner or the original Freddy's location. However, for this, it doesn't really matter. In this pizzeria, we are shown the springlock variants of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie performing on stage. And throughout FNAF 4, we learn about the crying child, William Afton's son. And for some reason, he absolutely hates these animatronics. The reason why, we don't 100% know, although some speculate it's because he's seen his father, William Afton, wearing the Spring Bonnie suit committing murders. And since he's a younger kid, he doesn't realize the fact that it's his father. He sees it as this animatronic going rogue. And so he's absolutely fearful of them and doesn't want to go near them. And he is being bullied by everyone around him because of this. And it leads up to the climax of his birthday, where his brother Michael, or Foxy Bro, and some of his friends decide to play a mean trick on him that ends in utter disaster. They take him up to Fredbear himself and raise him close towards his mouth. And Fredbear, who was most likely performing a pre-programmed show, was moving his mouth up and down while singing. And when Michael and his friends put the crying child's head into Fredbear's mouth, Fredbear went to sing another note for the song and smashed his jaw down onto the head of the crying child. This immediately damaged the animatronic, leaving the mouth closed, an even worse situation. The crying child was then rushed to the hospital, where he unfortunately, not very long after, passed away. And this begins the tragic story of Fredbear. And this is the part of the story in which Fredbear transforms into Golden Freddy. You see, if the Bite of 83 took place at Fredbear's family diner, they obviously would have had to have closed the establishment because of this. However, they would have kept their assets for their next location, which I believe by 1983 was already open by this point, the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And one of the reasons why I know that the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location opened in 1983 is because of Help Wanted 2. We get these tokens that show us this. Since 1983, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, clearly stating that's when this restaurant opened. We also hear in the training cassette tapes of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, which I believe are the training cassette tapes for this original Freddy's location, that they were keeping 2 of these mascot costumes in the back room. These mascot costumes has to be Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, and it would only make sense for Fazbear Entertainment to do a redesign on Golden Freddy so that when patrons walked into the location, they didn't look at Fredbear and go, oh, that's the one that bit a kid's head off. And so they changed his hat and bow tie from purple to black, and possibly started even calling him by a different name, such as the Yellow Bear. The next several events in the timeline happen pretty quickly. DMCI takes place in which William Afton murders 5 children and stuffs them into Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy while he wears Spring Bonnie. And of course, the child who was stuffed into Golden Freddy goes on to possess this animatronic. We can see this in FNAF 2's minigame, Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, where right before it ends we can see the 5th child, which then turns into a Golden Freddy jump scare. Now, it's also been theorized for years now that the spirit of the 5th child, which is presumably named Cassidy, is not the only spirit haunting Golden Freddy. Some people believe that actually the crying child was the first spirit to begin haunting this costume, since he was the victim of the Bite of 83. Some of the evidence for this consists of a book called the Five Nights at Freddy's Security Logbook, where throughout this book it seems that there are 2 spirits communicating to one another, possibly the 2 spirits that are within Golden Freddy. However, there is still a debate on whether or not this is the case, and some people have brought up the fact that it's strange that the crying child was not actually stuffed inside the costume, but actually died at a hospital probably miles away. According to the newspapers that are found in Five Nights at Freddy's 1 throughout the hallways, it is told to us that after the 5 children were murdered and stuffed into the animatronics, that location of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, and a few years later reopened as the FNAF 2 location from Five Nights at Freddy's 2, also known as the 1987 location. Now, this is where things get a little murky on what actually happened to Golden Freddy, because Phone Guy in FNAF 2 tells us that in the back room are the original classic animatronics from the first Freddy's location. These would have been the suits that William Afton had stuffed the bodies into. However, when we look into the back room, we don't see Golden Freddy anywhere. However, we do see Golden Freddy throughout the gameplay of FNAF 2. He will appear in our office and crash our game. We can also see a massive floating head down the hallway. To me, it's very obvious that there's something special about Golden Freddy in this. Obviously, the massive floating head in FNAF 2 isn't an animatronic, it's some sort of apparition. Same could be said for the time when he appears in our office in FNAF 2. He merely appears and then literally disappears right in front of us. So it's clear to me that by the time Golden Freddy is possessed, there is something special about him. He can do things that other animatronics cannot, such as teleporting. Now, according to the in-game newspaper of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, we are told that this location was only open for a couple weeks in 1987, before unfortunately having to close. They scrapped the toy animatronics, which were the new ones for that location, but decided to keep the original classics for a possible reorganization of the company. That would have meant they would be keeping Golden Freddy, which I believe is exactly what we see in Five Nights at Freddy's 1, which is supposed to take place after the 1987 location that we just talked about. According to the Five Nights at Freddy's interactive novel series, one of the books called The Week Before tells us that Fazbear Entertainment, when they opened up the FNAF 1 location, they had redesigned the animatronics to look like their classic designs from the very first original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location opened up in 1983. This would mean that Fazbear Entertainment took the withered and torn up animatronics and turned them into the classics in what we see in FNAF 1. And I think that they did the exact same thing with Golden Freddy. Just look how Golden Freddy appears in FNAF 1. He also can appear in our office and jump scare us. Very similar to what he did in FNAF 2, except look at the two side by side. The FNAF 2 variant of Golden Freddy looks very withered and torn up, as where in FNAF 1 it looks updated, even cleaned to a certain degree. And that leads me to believe that what we see in FNAF 1 isn't just a ghostly apparition, it's actually a physical animatronic. Golden Freddy just has the ability to teleport, which we also see happening in the FNAF book the week before. But eventually the FNAF 1 location closes down, and we travel throughout the FNAF timeline all the way to FNAF 3, which supposedly takes place in 2015. We play as Michael as he is trying to find his father and bring him to justice at the Fazbear Frights attraction. William Afton not only is in the Spring Bonnie suit, but is spring-locked inside of it, which is how he died way back when. As we know, Michael survives working at Fazbear Frights and actually burns it to the ground. However, we know that Springtrap survived because he shows up again in Five Nights at Freddy's 6. In his version called Scrap Trap. But just look at the differences here. If we put up Springtrap on this side and Scrap Trap, we can clearly see that there are big differences in their appearance. And some have pointed out that a lot of the different parts that are on Scrap Trap look very similar to that of Golden Freddy. For instance, the feet that are on Scrap Trap, they are three-toed and look exactly like Golden Freddy's feet. And so the theory is that after the FNAF 3 fire, William Afton needed to repair his Springtrap costume, and possibly went back to a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location to recover the suit of Golden Freddy, and repaired himself with parts of Golden Freddy. However, this would turn into a dire situation for him. As we know in FNAF UCN, we play as William Afton, and he is being tormented in his own personal purgatory by the spirit of Golden Freddy. And if he had literally attached parts of the Golden Freddy costume to himself, that could be the reason why that actually happened. After FNAF UCN, that basically seems where the story of Golden Freddy has come to a close, at least for the grand scheme of things. There has been some references to Golden Freddy in the newer games such as Ruin and Security Breach, but until the next game comes out, we won't be able to say definitively if Golden Freddy is in the new games as a big part of the story. Make sure to check out this video where I go through the complete animatronics timeline in FNAF. I hope you all enjoyed today's video on Golden Freddy and his history in the FNAF timeline. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Have a fantastic day.